Hello, welcome to Talking Rubbish, a weekly podcast delving deep into the world of recycling and discussing the truth behind snappy headlines and one-sided stories. I'm Ellie Piper, author of the Rubbish Book, and I'm joined by Robbie Staniforth, my far from rubbish friend. And we are joined today by Ellie Piper, my far from rubbish wife. Wow. Happy New Year, everyone. This is quite the turn up for the books.
What a way to start the new year.
Here we go. Who's let her on?
Absolutely. How have you managed to convince her to come on is more the point.
I'm sure that is what she will be saying when she comes in. But Robbie, it's New Year, January 1st. We thought, following our fun Lego episode of Christmas Day, we need an equally fun New Year episode. And what more fun can I have than bringing my wife to work?
What a way to start 2026.
Very much New Year, old me. Nothing's changed. So what are we going to talk about today? Ellie is actually a lawyer, but we thought that might be too boring for Happy New Year. But,
that's not very fair, James.
But I think she'd be the first to say it. But what we did do is travel around the world for a bit, for 15 months. And we've had a few listeners write in over the month say, we'd love to hear more about your travels. And I thought, hey, it'd be a good opportunity to do that. And we even had one person on Discord say, I'd love to hear more from Ellie, following me telling everyone that she was almost our co-host for a bit. Or my co-host.
Switch to Ellie.
Before we bring Ellie on, let's do some additions and corrections. So we had Roger message us following our, quite a few of these actually are about the battery fire episode, that lots of people feeding back into that. So that's great. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'd made a statement in there. This was actually a proactive addition and correction, because I'd made a statement that I thought battery fires were, like the larger battery fires, were more likely to come from larger batteries.
Mm-hmm. What, bigger explosion or something because it's a bigger battery? That was the logic.
And I kept reading the news and I was like, is that true? Because everyone keeps talking about vapes. So if everyone's talking about vapes, they're obviously worried about vapes. If they're worried about vapes, that must be because they cause the fires. So I did proactively reach out to Roger before the episode went out to say, have I just got this completely wrong? And he responded to say, it is true that larger devices can cause more damage, but they are more easily detected and removed. So if you have an e-scooter battery, it's pretty easy for people to see that it's in amongst the rubbish, whereas things like vapes are really hard to detect. And there's just so much more in a pile of waste. You might get thousands in a mountain of waste compared to a couple of e-scooters. So it all comes down to a numbers game. Either way, you're basically putting a battery that could cause fire in a load of kindling. Obviously, we're talking about 1,300 fires a year compared to millions of things thrown in the bin incorrectly. So it's just a numbers game and trying to avoid any opportunity for a fire to start. And the thing you probably don't want is the thing you can't find in the rubbish.
Exactly. So big or small folks, don't be putting your vapes and small batteries in the wrong place. They could have a massive impact too.
Yeah, our point still stands, absolutely. It was just, I said that line and then I started doubting myself when I was coming to do the edit. And after the episode went out, we had Paul on Discord, because one of the things we talked about in the episode is me finding that book in Tenerife.
Oh,
and
yes.
We'd said, if anyone's found anything interesting in a bin, let us know. And Paul, who I think works for a local authority, said he used to run waste collection in a very affluent area.
Oh, okay.
And the biggest bin find, unfortunately, he can't tell us about, but it relates to something found in a very famous ex-Premiership footballer's bin.
Really?
Oh my God. I want to know.
Yeah, definitely. Mine's racing now. What is it? Jewellery? Why can't he tell us? It can't just be something as simple as jewellery, can it? Very interesting.
He did go on to say that in Greater Manchester, they have a world-famous Renew network where trash is turned into treasure, and they turn rubbish into about 50 to 60 grand per month in income. People are throwing away some real treasures here.
Absolutely.
So one man's trash is another man's treasure is definitely the phrase I should have used instead of where there's muck, there's brass, which I think is the one I did use with the Tenerife, but Ellie told me off straight after that. So Everyone's about to get a lot of insight into, we're going to have 50 minutes of Ellie telling me off here.
Yeah, she's about to get her own back.
Yeah, I think looking forward to it. And finally, one thing I noticed this morning actually was Bristol Waste had put up on social media saying that over the festive period, they might be doing some co-mingle collections.
Ooh.
Did you see this?
Really? What, this is emergency measures here? Usually it's all curbside separated.
Exactly. Normally they're curbside sorting into trucks that have different compartments for waste. However, over Christmas, because our waste increases by about 30%, they're going to be borrowing some of the normal bin lorries, the ones that are normally used for general waste, to do some of the recycling collections. And so Bristol's going to have a bit of mixed recycling. They said, don't be alarmed if you see us putting your recycling into what looks like a normal bin. It's because we are dealing with an increase in waste.
Okay, so when that post inevitably pops up on my community WhatsApp group, I'll direct them to social media to say, do not fear. It's going to a recycling facility and it'll get sorted out at a later date.
Absolutely. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, EcoSurety, who are on a mission to rid the world of unnecessary packaging. They help brands navigate the tricky world of extended producer responsibility, but that is not all. They also collaborate on some incredible recycling projects and consumer awareness campaigns for those tough-to-recycle materials. If you're an organisation looking to make smarter packaging choices, check them out at ecosurety.com. And the best thing you can do is share our show with your friends and family. Just recommend Talking Rubbish to them or leave us a review. And if you leave us a review, you can be Robbie's Review of the Week.
Absolutely. And as established last week, it definitely is my review of the week. This one comes in from iSteven 87, I should say. iSteven 87.
You've got to not then act like it's the first time you've ever seen this.
I've never seen it before in my life.
If you're going to get cocky, Robbie, you got to be ready with and I've read this before. Anyway, the one I picked this week is iSteven 87.
And it was a 5-star on Apple. What's Apple? I've not heard of that one before, James. Anyway, this is a pretty succinct one for the new year, but I like it all the same. Excellent. See above.
It's a classic Talking Rubbish review. This is 2 of these we've had now. A lovely heading of excellent or words to that effect. And then content, see above.
See above.
I love it.
Keep them coming.
And you can follow us on social media at Rubbish Podcast. You can email talkingrubbishpodcast@gmail.com or you can WhatsApp us. Also join our Discord. It's the easiest way to engage with us and listeners of the show. And the link to all of those things is in the show notes. The time has come to bring Ellie on for the first time ever, and possibly only time because I don't think she'll ever agree to do this again, onto Talking Rubbish. Hi, Ellie.
Hello.
This is weird, isn't it?
It's
Maybe we
very
should
weird.
have let Robbie do the hi, Ellie. Hang on. Go, Robbie.
Hello, Ellie, because I'm actually seeing you for the first time today, so I don't need
Hi,
to pretend.
Robbie. Hi, Robbie, my favourite co-host of Talking Rubbish.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear
Oh
first
my
up.
God, it starts. It starts. What a sad new year this has already turned out to be.
Am I allowed to start by making my own addition/correction?
Please do.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I've regularly been slated on the podcast for telling you off, James, and don't like to be portrayed as a naggy wife. I did not have a go at you or tell you off for saying the muck brass thing. It's just that I'd never heard that saying before. I thought one man's trash is another man's treasure is far more well-known a phrase than, what was it again?
Where there's muck, there's
Where
brass.
there's muck, there's brass. Robbie, have you ever heard that before?
I have heard it, but I'm in the
fair.
industry,
Yeah,
so this
okay.
is not a representative sample.
It's a rubbish thing. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, the more important thing, Ellie, is how much toilet paper does James use?
I'm out. I'm quitting.
The statistic that came up on the podcast was the average, and I think James was one of the ones who was well above the average, pulling the average down, whereas I'm one of the ones well below the average, and it meets in the middle. Yeah. I'd rather not answer that question.
I've derailed us already.
It's amazing how many of our chats of an evening now are toilet paper related.
Well, yeah. Sad turn of events in our household.
Okay, let's crack on. God, I didn't expect me to be picked apart so early on. So I'll say some things here to set us up. But Over 439 days between 2021 and 2022, Ellie and I packed our bags and visited 26 countries across all 7 continents, travelling 78,270 miles. And just in case you're wondering if my habit of data gathering is reserved just for recycling, we took 156 vehicles, did 47 laundry loads, 16 cinema trips, had to take 14 COVID tests each, and I had 8 haircuts. So I kept data on everything.
And how many haircuts did you have, Ellie?
I think I just had one, but I think, I go for a lot longer between haircuts than James does anyway, mostly because I don't really enjoy having my haircut. But it felt a lot riskier to try and trust somebody where there might have been a language barrier with their haircut. Whereas I feel like guys' hair is
short back and sides.
Exactly. Yeah.
I did once have short back and sides, by the way. I do remember. It's a few decades ago now, but
well, yours is far lower maintenance now, Robbie, which is
Absolutely.
probably easier to sort out when you're abroad. But I wasn't confident, shall we say, of being sure what I was going to leave the hairdressing salon with. So I went as long as possible, and I think I only had one. But by the time we came home, I was in dire need of another one, so it was long overdue.
And one thing we did was we took loads and loads and loads of photos, which was great. So I worked it out, 48,173 photos over the 15 months. And I reckon, Robbie, 10,000 of them were bins. You'd be proud of me.
You've got a collection of global bin photos. I am genuinely jealous.
So as it's New Year's Day, we're relaxing back into the swing of talking rubbish. We just thought we'd have a bit of fun. When we were talking about maybe should we do this episode, we were reflecting back on those 7 continents and thinking, actually, there's an interesting sustainability angle in all of them. There were lots and lots of stories as we've told over the course of this podcast, but I think there's interesting sustainability angles that we want to kind of focus on each of the continents.
And so I think the best way to do this is to go in order, continent by continent. And I hope I've got this order right. I've got this order right, not James, obviously, because I've scripted all of this, is to go through the order in which you visited them. And I'll be asking the questions. So I believe you started in South America. I suppose the first question is, why did you choose to start there?
Yeah, very good question. It wasn't originally our plan to start in South America. We were going to start in Europe. But as the departure date for our trip fell still in COVID, we were coming out of COVID, or at least the sort of initial phase of COVID, I guess. But the world hadn't fully opened up yet, so travel was still quite tricky in certain areas. So we decided to sort of flip our trip around. And the first country that we decided to visit was in South America, because the restrictions on travel to South America were a little more relaxed than other places in the world, particularly if you left from or flew to South America from somewhere other than England. Lots of the South American countries were still on what was the red list at the time for prohibited travel. But that was only a problem if you were returning to the UK, in which case you would need to quarantine coming from those countries. We managed to get a flight from France to Colombia in South America and started our trip that way, and didn't need to worry too much about the quarantine side of things, partly because a lot of the countries in South America had no quarantine requirements in place at the time, and partly because we weren't going back to the UK anytime soon. We were just heading off on our travels and then carrying on. We decided to start in South America, and that was instead of going into Europe and then going across we were going to go across Russia actually on the Trans-Siberian Express. South America became our starting point.
I think it's fair to say we just didn't want to spend 10 days in a hotel. We didn't want to land in a hotel, them COVID test us and go, you're locked in for 10 days. We just couldn't imagine anything worse. So it was go to a country that is not going to happen in.
And what was the first sort of thing that you noticed from a sustainability perspective?
So we started in Colombia. What I remember most about that time was just being a bit deer in the headlights. We sort of hadn't travelled for a while because of COVID, and then suddenly you're thrown into this completely different environment and completely different country. All I remember about Bogota was how vast it was. I don't remember anything specific actually about the recycling side of things, although you guys did talk recently on the podcast about it was one of the Earthshot Prize winners, wasn't it, for increasing its sustainability since then. So it actually would be a very interesting experiment to do, to kind of go back now and see how it compared. But I remember thinking, God, this place is vast. And so, well, you'd hope recycling infrastructure has improved and kind of developed in the time since we were there. But I don't remember it being particularly bad, but I'm not sure if it was necessarily the thing I was focusing on most, because it was very new. We were right at the outset, and I realised just how much my GCSE Spanish was not going to get me through several months in South America, which was not great.
You had that damn owl, that Duolingo owl just...
Oh yeah,
giving you your daily
guilt
street.
tripping me into guilt tripping me into doing more Duolingo, which was sort of helping with the Yeah, with the vocab, but not much else.
We were lucky, really, because COVID is an absolute nightmare for so many reasons, and it was horrible for tourism. These countries were decimated, essentially. They'd lost tourists for such a long time. What it meant for us was we left the UK and people were saying we're having to cancel trips. So, we'd booked a trip to walk the Inca Trail or do Torres del Paine in Chile and go to the Amazon, and all these things got cancelled. And it was because the UK operators that we'd booked with had said, we've got to send out a UK person to supervise, and we can't do that because they're all on the red list. So, but then as soon as we landed in the country, people were like, oh, you want to go the Inca Trail? Yeah, great. Come on, we'll go tomorrow.
Yeah, desperate for work, I assume.
And things that normally had like a 1-2 year wait list that you'd have to really think through and plan in advance were just things we could rock up to and do, which was amazing, really, but also quite sad to watch because you just saw the excitement that people were like, oh my God, a tourist has turned up.
Yeah, that did go some way to assuaging my guilt, actually, which we'll come on to later. But the sustainability or lack thereof of traveling the world was quite tough to swallow. But knowing that at the time at which we were doing it was actually contributing back into these local economies, and all these people who had actually really struggled during COVID because their economy was so based on tourism, that just completely fell off a cliff in COVID and the restrictions on travel. It did, go some way to making you feel slightly better about traveling to be there, and therefore being able to support them in their usual sort of business, keeping their business going.
Yeah, absolutely. Making a contribution to the local economy, as they would say. But then, so from a sustainability perspective, what are the sort of interesting standout things from South America more broadly? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So we went to the Atacama Desert in Chile, northern Chile, which was in the news a lot before we left, and probably still since then, as being a place renowned for fashion dumping, basically. So these vast illegal dumps of fast fashion that had been not used very much, not worn very much, and then discarded, ending up in these patches. I think one video called it the Great Fashion Garbage Patch. So you guys have spoken about the ocean garbage patches before. This was a desert-based one. All this imported waste that isn't from Chile, but gets imported probably from countries like our own. And so when we went there, we were very alive to that kind of story, and we were on the lookout, I suppose, for those things. We didn't actually see any specific ones, and granted, we didn't go out of our way to find them, but we were definitely kind of assuming, because of the way these stories had been written, we were assuming that it would be quite easy to find them, and we would see them quite easily. And that didn't really happen. That being said, there was still a lot of rubbish and waste collecting on the sides of roads, just basically on the verge, on the edge of the desert and the sand. And it was such a windy place that you could kind of understand that wherever there was inhabited areas, the wind would just pick up where waste wasn't necessarily being captured and dealt with appropriately. It was just being blown in the wind, and it would just end up collecting on these verges on the side of the road. And we get that a bit in the UK. I noticed it the other day as we were driving down the motorway, and you see quite a lot of whatever it is, plastic bags caught in branches and trees and things like that. But this was on a different scale. It was quite sad, actually.
Well, I'm glad to hear that James didn't drag you to all of these fashion garbage patches, but it sounds like it was pretty unavoidable just seeing waste being mismanaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad it wasn't pivotal part of our trip was not journeys to recycling centres around the world. But as you say, it was very hard to ignore.
And I guess the other thing worth mentioning in South America, aside from just, as you say, rubbish, and particularly in places like the Atacama Desert, where there were lots of inhabited towns and then big places for rubbish to collect in. The other thing is just the quantity of meat eating. It was unbelievable. Like, every meal we had would be so meat-led. And then they'd say, oh, and 2 veg. And you'd be like, oh, great, what are the veg? Rice and potatoes. And we did get to this point where I was like, I'm really keen to have something green, but it was a lot of meat. And I'll always remember when we were going to do a tour across the salt flats in Bolivia, which is super interesting. And we'll definitely do an episode on those at some point, because the lithium coming out of them is really interesting for battery generation. But they texted me the night before to say, we're setting up your tour. And their words were, are you vegetarian or are you normal? And I loved it. I loved it.
And what, that wasn't a mistranslation?
Oh,
that
no.
was just
It was
literally
very much.
how they would describe it.
Very much. You're normal if you're a meat eater, you're weird if you're vegetarian. And that sort of feeling happened throughout South America. That wasn't one country. And I had a quick look at it, actually. According to World Population Review, Argentina does eat the most beef out of all countries in the world. And they're at 49 kilos per person per year. So to put that in perspective, the UK is at about 17. So it's about 3 times the amount
Wow.
of beef that an average Argentinian would eat. And if we say a steak weighs on average 250 grams, it means the average Argentinian is eating 196 steaks a year. So basically a steak every other day. And when you look at the stats on this, beef is 7 times worse than chicken or pork, roughly, according to Our World in Data. So you could see how that could start becoming a real problem, that difference. I think food for us, as we went continent to continent, food became a really interesting thing that we were observing around sustainability, how meat-led a diet was versus, veggie-led.
Absolutely. I think the other thing about it is obviously the rich culture of cattle farming and beef eating, especially in Argentina. But we know that one of the biggest sort of threats to the Amazon is deforestation. And I was looking into it actually for the purposes of our chat today. And I think the WWF estimates that about 80% of deforestation in the Amazon is due to or driven by cattle farming and clearing the way for more cattle to be reared, for more beef for consumption around the world. So although we did visit the Amazon on our trip, we did our best to do it sustainably. And it was in Ecuador. We stayed in like an eco lodge and tried to, limit our impact, I guess, as much as possible and learn about it and see as much wildlife as possible, which kind of increases your passion for protecting it. But elsewhere, that it's just being kind of destroyed and really sadly taken over by deforestation for cattle farming.
And so next up, after South America, is somewhere that's literally a far out there destination.
A place with very little cattle farming.
Very, very little opportunity for cattle farming and the production of beef. So Antarctica, what possessed you to go there, and how did that suddenly come up as somewhere top of your list? And were you surprised what you found there? I imagine it to be pretty desolate. Is that right?
I'm not sure Antarctica was ever not going to be on my list. That was like the one when I'd decided as a kid I wanted to travel the world.
Yeah.
It was, I just need to see Antarctica.
Okay, wow. What was the fascination?
Oh, I mean, so many things. My obsession with wildlife, nature, David Attenborough as a kid. It was just it was a place that was so far away from my day-to-day life. And I wanted to experience it. And the challenge of that, of course, is that I get extremely seasick. And to get there, you have to go across the famous Drake's Passage. And Drake's Passage is the joining of 2 fairly major currents that can create very, very extreme swells. So I did spend a couple of days in bed on the way over to Antarctica, I think, Ellie. Is that fair?
I think, I think they said the swells can get up to 12 meters. And when we went, they were about 3 or 4. And I don't really get seasick, which is, I'm very lucky in that way. But James definitely does. So we were, on the boat, and you'd met other people that we were doing the trip with. I think it probably took out about 60 to 70% of the people on board, because I went to the dining area for lunch and James just absolutely couldn't face any food. So I just went on my own, and there were just empty seats everywhere from all the people who were in the same situation as him, just laid out in bed, not wanting to move at all because it was too rocky to sort of stand up if you're feeling sick. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, and how long was the passage then? How long is Drake's Passage? I've got no idea.
Again, depends on the conditions, I think. We did it in a day and a half, I think. James? Can't remember. Yeah, a day and a half to 2 days, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 2 days, yeah.
2 days, maybe. Okay, 2 days. And it can take much longer if the conditions are rougher. So yeah, we were lucky, albeit, still felt very unwell during that time.
And then what are the environmental challenges you found on the way or when you got there?
When I was kind of looking at this, one of the things that's most interesting is how many people now go to Antarctica. Visitors in the 1990s were like 8,000 people. And in 2024, this had risen to 124,000. So the quantity of people visiting Antarctica is huge and so different to where we were 20, 30 years ago. We didn't see it very much, actually, because of COVID. They cancelled so many of the boats going over. But they had warned us that on a normal trip, you would see lots of other boats.
But as we spoke about earlier, a lot of the things that we were doing were quite low on numbers of visitors because there weren't that many tourists there at that time. And that was true of this trip as well. So we were on a boat with other people, but the boat was probably half capacity, I think, of tourists, but we're still able to run, which we felt really lucky to be involved when it was still able to go. One thing we didn't realise was, until we got there anyway, was the size of the boat is really important. So if the boat going to the Antarctic has less than 100 passengers, all the passengers can get off the boat at one time, go onto the ice and explore, see what it's all about. If it's between 100 and 500, those people will have to rotate, and only a certain number could up to 100 off at a time. If you have more than 500 in the vessel itself, no one is allowed to get off at all. And I think about 570 boats or trips for ecotourism go each year. About 2/3 are allowed off the boat. So about a third don't set foot on the continent at all. And we did have a discussion about that, saying, oh God, we're really lucky we're on a boat that's small enough that we can get off it. What is the point of going if you're not going to get off?
I can't imagine being stuck in bed for 2 days with this extreme seasickness to then be like, oh, and I get a lovely view out the window.
Just open the curtains for half an hour, drink it in, and then have another 2 hours of seasickness.
Yeah, sort of bringing a new meaning to cabin fever, I think. But at the same time, there are people who are probably really used to doing cruises for really long stretches of time. They're really happy in that environment, and actually being able to see the land of Antarctica, the icebergs, the brilliant blue water, all of that kind of stuff from where they are is a bit different to just seeing blank open ocean, which you would obviously be used to on a really long cruise. So maybe it suits some people more than others, but and there's obviously the cost to consider as well, because it's not a cheap trip to do. But yeah, we counted ourselves really lucky that we were on a boat that we could disembark from, and we also decided to join the snorkeling team. So we were sort of suited and booted in dry suits to get off the boat every time, and that allowed us to go walking on the ice and also to get in the water. So yeah, we were really lucky.
Oh wow, that's cool. And so what did you find? Like, what are some of the issues that you found there? I mean, I imagine it to be an absolute pristine wilderness. Is that true?
What we found is a very strict boat. They were very, very clear that you couldn't really take anything onto the ice, and you'd have to have your boots washed leaving and getting on. They'd have to stay in a room that was clean. You would basically be hoovered and your clothes would be hoovered to make sure that you weren't bringing microbes or bacteria or anything like that out onto the snow and out onto the ice. And it was so important. It was drilled into us that this was not a place where litter could ever enter. Just watching a group of 100 people on a boat become so self-aware of the impact they could have, and be in this kind of sterile environment where you were taking it so seriously, it definitely was quite inspiring in terms of how we could maybe think of the rest of the planet as we walk around it. But we don't really think too much like that.
And then, so do you literally mean like you can't drop wrappers because you're not allowed to take the packaging wrappers onto the island? Is that how it works?
That's exactly it. And I'm not saying we were getting, full patted down before we disembarked to make sure that we didn't have anything in our pockets. But it was, very much the messaging was to leave everything on the boat. You didn't need it. You weren't on the ice. It was so cold that you're not going out there for any significant length of time. So nobody needs a snack while they're going. They have, they feed you really well on these trips because obviously everyone's very cold. So you don't need to really take anything with you except, your camera or phone or whatever it is. And so it became the norm to just leave everything behind and then, off you go. And that reduces the risk of dropping anything inadvertently or on purpose. And then the other thing that was really drilled into us was about the wildlife we were encountering. So keeping a distance, wildlife disturbance was something to really be avoided. So keeping minimum distances and limiting our time on the ice as well. So yes, we could disembark, but we weren't going to be spending hours on end there because, it's not fair to the animals and wildlife that live there who are so not used to humans to come in and disturb their habitats. That wasn't what we were there to do at all. Avoiding damage as well. So there are old sort of research base stations there and things like that. So those were, we weren't going inside them or anything like that. We could see them from a distance. We obviously, as you go out onto the ice, you're compacting the snow that's there just by walking on it. So had to be very careful where you walked, particularly staying clear of penguin highways.
Okay.
So when we went to see penguin colonies, they have created paths through them, which are the path of least resistance. So evolutionarily, they're there to try and get their way up to the colony and down to the water as easily as possible. They don't want to be expending energy that they, obviously need to keep them alive. On making this route. So they'll all try and find the path of least resistance, and then everyone will follow it. If we go in and we trample all over it with our heavy boots and our, much more significant body mass than them, we're making their lives harder because we're making that journey less smooth. So it was all about keeping away from them, letting them do their thing and, follow their routes and not disturbing those routes as we sort of observed their behavior, not getting in their way. And the other place we observed them was underwater, but that was a lot easier because you're obviously not no match for a penguin underwater. So they were zooming past us really, really fast, and we were just trying to keep up with them. So
trying to even just track or catch sight of one not moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour is probably pretty tough.
I guess it's worth saying we are conscious and were conscious of the CO2 of this whole trip, and we'll come on to it at the end. But particularly in Antarctica, I had a quick look, and an average trip there generates around 5 tons of CO2 equivalent per person, which is about half an average UK citizen will create in a year. But that's just on the one trip. This is like 10 days. And a lot of that will be the flight there, which obviously we'd sort of rolled into our own trip. So it's not like we made a special flight to get to South America, to get out to Antarctica. But that 5 tons is significant. There is another thing, because of the amount of cruise ships that are going down, things like black carbon are coming out of the engines. So soot basically is coming out of the engines. It darkens the snow, which accelerates the melting. And I did read a horrific study, as in to prepare for this episode, that said one tourist could be responsible for melting 83 tons of snow. Now, if I'd read that before I went, I think that would have put me off, because that is so significant. Nearly 100 tons of snow melted just because you wanted to go to Antarctica. Being completely honest, it was such a non-negotiable at the start, because it was somewhere I really wanted to experience. And it's only now I reflect on it, particularly because we're doing this podcast, that we're like, maybe we shouldn't have gone. It is significant, but I think we learned so much, and we took part in citizen science, and we, counted birds and wildlife, and we tried to do something positive while we were down there. So we always have that, but there is a bit of guilt definitely behind it.
Yeah, well, let's hope things get better with kind of electrification of those ships and banning of heavy fuel oil and those kind of things. But the next stop from there, continental Europe, it's pretty similar to the UK, or were there some actually quite big differences in the way that they treat sustainability and rubbish, and your observations that you had?
Yeah, obviously it's very similar to the UK, and I think their recycling infrastructure is really good in mainland Europe. So everything we were seeing in terms of bins and sourcing and all of that kind of stuff was very familiar, if not better, I think, out in public spaces in Europe. You've already covered in quite a lot of detail DRS, deposit return schemes, on this podcast, so maybe we won't repeat you here, but we encountered them along the way quite a lot. It wasn't very easy for us as tourists to use them very frequently, but we noticed them a lot. And we spent a while in Europe, and the way we decided to get around, again trying to avoid the flights, was interrailing. So by this point, COVID had eased a little bit, and it was possible to do cross-border travel over land rather than flying. So that reduced our flights, which made me very happy. And we decided to do interrailing trips sort of through, we started in Denmark, home of Lego, which James was very, very pleased about. So we visited the Lego HQ in Villand.
How long did you have to spend there though, Ellie? Like a week in Legoland?
Hours and days and months of my life. Thankfully, it was very interesting for me as well. So, how long were we there for? We didn't go to Legoland, did we? We just did the kind of HQ, the Lego house, which was very, very cool, actually. So did a couple of days in Villand, and then we went up north up Sweden and then south through Norway. And when we were up in Sweden, we decided to visit the ice hotel, which the place you go to reach the ice hotel is somewhere called Kiruna. And there was a sort of board outside the train station explaining what they were doing with Kiruna, which was baffling to us at the time. We were thought it was completely bizarre. But essentially what they were doing was moving the town, or moving part of the town, picking it up, moving it 3 kilometers down the road, and sort of re-establishing it a little bit further away. And the reason for that was all to do with mining, I think, James?
Yeah, Kiruna, massive on iron mining. And so cracks have started appearing in the hospital and the school. I think I read that Kiruna produces 80% of the EU's supply of iron ore. It's just this one town where loads and loads of mining had happened, and people had realised, oh no, we need to move the town now. I think it started in 2017 and it's going to be completed in 2035. It's costing them 2.5 billion euros. And yeah, it's 6,000 people being moved, 3,200 homes, 750 hotel rooms, 1,000 office jobs. It was unbelievable.
That's crazy. And that's just, they're not moving the ice hotel though. That was actually somewhere else.
No, that's outside of Kiruna. Yeah, that's quite,
okay.
That's a drive out. Yeah, that's right. And we actually interrailed across Europe. So this was the start of it. And then we sort of went all the way down because we'd met a couple on the Antarctic boat who invited us to their wedding in Portugal.
Oh,
And
wow.
we were like, yeah, we could do that. Like, why not? We're making it up as we go along. So we ended up interrailing all the way down to Lisbon to make it in time for this wedding. And of course, I don't know how many months had passed between Antarctica and their wedding, a few months. And for us, we'd just been traveling the whole time. So it was like we hadn't left them. You know, it was just one big holiday, really.
And was it heartening, you know, the fact that there is this rail network across Europe and you can travel easily around? Or is it quite expensive and actually you were doing the right thing, but it actually costs a bomb to get around the place?
No, it was actually quite efficient, both sort of time and budget. I think we kind of get used to having really expensive trains in the UK, and that puts us off a little bit, but we found the Interrail pass really worked well for us. It's just under 180 euros, 179 euros for a 5-day pass over the course of a month. So that's not, you know, you have to do all your travel in 5 days. It means you can travel on 5 days in that month. And that's as much travel as you can fit into that day, basically. You pick the date, you tell them what day it's going to be, and then you can take as many sort of Interrail trains as possible within that time. So that worked really well for us. So if you want to spend a bit of time in a stop and then do a big long journey to get down to your next destination and do the same thing, 5 journeys actually across Europe can get you quite a long way. And that's exactly how we did it, to get down from sort of top of Sweden all the way down to Portugal.
So come on then, James. Surely you know the overall distance travelled and your CO2 savings, being a stat man that you
I
are.
should know the exact. It was like 3,950 something kilometres. So nearly 4,000 kilometres. But yes, the Interrail app was really cool because you put in where you were going and what you were doing, and it popped up saying, here's your CO2 saving compared to flying. So ours was 90%. So we were 90% better taking the train than flying, which was great. One thing we hadn't quite anticipated was the seat reservation system. So there's some countries where you can just jump on a train. Say, I've got the Interrail pass, you scan it. There's some countries where you have to buy essentially a seat. All the ticket is doing is getting you the journey, but you have to tell them which train you're getting on which seat. And because we were very last minute on this, you know, this was live for us. At the point this happened, we were in Mannheim in Germany trying to get to Paris, and we suddenly realised that France had this seat reservation system. They said, but look, all the trains have been booked for months. We were like, we need to get on one.
Hadn't quite reckoned on COVID easing, meant that obviously everyone else was starting to travel as well. And that meant that Interrail places were really getting booked up, and we just hadn't quite put 2 and 2 together.
Which is exactly why we ended up on a 4 a.m. train going out of Mannheim into Paris, and had a very, very early start on that particular day.
Oh, shame. Okay, well, lesson learned. And hopefully the influencers out there won't make the same mistake. So off from there to another familiar continent to me, Africa. Although I only really know the southern countries, and I think you were in some of the northern countries, so I don't think we're going to cross over much here. But I can imagine things were very different there. What parts did you visit and what did you see?
Yeah, they were very different there. So from Portugal, it was a hop, skip and a jump over the Med to Morocco. It was our first stop. We decided our sort of the African leg of our trip just stayed essentially in the north of Africa, so Morocco and Egypt. And the reason for that was kind of primarily because of our reluctance to fly and wanting to always be moving forwards, I guess, in our journey, always wanting to be heading in the same direction rather than doubling back on ourselves and sort of having the additional carbon cost, I guess, of that. So we thought the African leg of our journey would be sort of down into the South Africa, or you know, other kind of countries where we might be able to do a safari or things like that. And I think actually a lot of people were quite surprised when we came back and said, we've been to Africa, but we didn't do any of the sort of traditional, I guess, touristy things that you would expect on an African trip. So we had this rule, no flying backwards, and realised during, again, COVID restrictions and sort of changes to flight patterns had meant that loads of flights were being routed through Addis Ababa and onwards from there. And in order to get down to, let's say, South Africa or wherever else we might want to go, it meant going in there as sort of a hub and then flying out again and then returning there and then making our onward journey. So we decided it was just too many flights and wouldn't been justifiable, I suppose. So instead what we did was we stayed in Morocco for a while. We did a road trip around Morocco, which was really good fun, and then moved over to Egypt after that for a few weeks. And that was sort of the extent of the African leg of our trip. And it was quite funny because every time we were there, we would say, in our minds, we'd got to Africa. This was great. This was the African leg of our journey. And everyone we spoke to who was local and was part of the sort of tourism industry, maybe doing a tour for us, would say, "Oh, so you're going to Africa after this?" And they considered themselves Arabic, sort of North African, but Arabic countries chiefly. And so to them, we weren't really yet setting foot in Africa, and we sort of felt a bit shortchanged because we were like, "No, we are in Africa. What do you mean? Why are we going to Africa after this?"
I've got to tick off these 7 continents. This can't.
Yeah, that was exactly it. We sort of said, it counts as Africa. It has to count because we are managing to take in all 7 at one trip.
I mean, my lasting memory of Egypt. Have you been to Egypt, Robbie?
No, I haven't. No, none of those North African countries.
So we took a train down from Cairo to Aswan, and then we got a Nile cruise from Aswan to Luxor. And this is such a short distance, Aswan to Luxor, but they really eke it out. You book out this Nile cruise for like 3 days, and then they just go really slow and stop loads of places for you to do tourist activities, which was great. Like, really enjoyed it and saw amazing things, these very, very historic ancient sites that are just beautiful, and we're so glad we saw it. But this has become so touristy. So I had a quick look. There's about 300 large boats at any one time that are doing this run forwards and backs between Luxor and Aswan. And it's fair to say it caused more congestion than anticipated. So my lasting memory is us parking up to go and see a site, and a number of other boats also parking up. But because the parking space is just one boat, all the boats park up alongside each other, and we had to walk through 7 boats to get off. So you're like leaving your boat, getting onto another boat, walking through their lobby, crossing onto another boat, walking through their lobby. And it's like this weird, like Inception, where you just see loads of rooms all in one go. It was like that. And then suddenly you're off to now. It was just a really interesting place. And because it was more touristy than I'd imagined, particularly that Nile trip, you just sympathise so much with the locals because there was huge amounts of noise coming from the running engines. They needed power all the time, so they'd be running even if the boats weren't moving. Very high levels of pollution going into the river because there's just so many boats. And, things like drinking out of plastic bottles, and you just see them in the river shortly after. It all feels very disheartening.
So you finished up there and next across to Asia. I mean, it's been years since decades probably since I was last on that continent. But my experience in Bali was definitely quite similar to the stories of informal waste management that one of our previous guests, Esther, talked about in episode 65. Did you share similar experiences to what she was talking about in that episode, Ellie, or was your perspective a bit different from the countries you visited?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what Esther had to say in her interview resonated with us and our experience. She obviously had a lot more hands-on personal experience, I think, of kind of like trying to come up with mechanisms for dealing with waste that were not going to impinge on sort of local traditions and things like that. But yeah, we arrived into the Philippines and then headed over to Borneo, and that's obviously a huge island, world's third largest island in the world, and full of biodiversity. But to get there, our journey wasn't quite as sort of idyllic, I guess, as we expected, going to such a sort of haven of biodiversity. We ended up in Sandakan on the north of the island, and this is the first place we kind of noticed extreme rubbish, I think, on the beaches and kind of being washed into like the harbours, a little bit like in the Atacama Desert where it all kind of gathered on the sides of the road. It was just coming in waves on the tide, and it was really sad to see, to be honest. It felt like no one was really taking responsibility for it, and it really would have needed a huge concerted effort to kind of clear it up and start again. And I can only imagine that they just don't have the infrastructure in place in quite a remote area to collect and then deal with all of that before it gets either blown into the sea or brought in on the tide. But yeah, it was all sort of just gathered there in clumps, which was quite sad to see when we kind of had this expectation in our minds of crystal blue waters and, everyone being really conscious about taking care of the sea, the coral, the biodiversity. And that just wasn't what we were seeing.
It's a good example of, and we had this quite a lot on our trip, where you would go to the Instagram friendly place or the place that's a nature reserve or protected or whatever. But your journey to get to that place was the exact opposite. So everything you did up till that point where you were taking your photo was the opposite. And it was really important for us to share all the negative stuff. That's kind of what we wanted to do, the difficult stuff. And this is a great example, Sandakan, which was a hub for so many places that these forests, and Turtle Island that we went to help with release some turtles into the ocean. We actually have a friend, Josh, who's a keen diver, and I reached out to him because I remembered he told us this story. He was heading out to Sipadan, which is one of the world's best dive sites just off the coast of Borneo. But to get to Sipadan, you've got to get a boat from Semporna. And I remember him telling us he'd never experienced anything like it. And the juxtaposition of going to this dive site that is pristine, protected area, and then the that hub in Semporna that you have to get to. I mean, just if you're of a sensitive disposition, just fast forward 10 seconds. So I'll just say this bit. He arrived to literally seeing dead dogs on fire, dead dogs down wells. They went to get on the boat, and there was an old man drinking out of a bottle of water, stood next to a bin, literally stood next to a bin, and he just threw it straight in the water. And then Josh looks down at the waves coming in, and it's all litter. And so it's very hard, because that's not the bit that people post on Instagram, obviously. And actually, that's the bit that's worth talking about, in my view.
And you touched a little bit upon diving there. So from Asia, you next went across to Australasia. And the Great Barrier Reef, surely you must have done some diving there.
We did, yeah, we did indeed do some diving there. We got a liverboard on the Great Barrier Reef. So we were on board a boat for about a week, I think it was, just shy of a week, to do some diving in the Great Barrier Reef. And although, very different experience, I guess, that we didn't see any rubbish, and there wasn't a load of sort of waste collecting in the water there. It's obviously world-renowned spot for diversity, and it's very well protected by law and taken care of. We did still have some reservations about our trip there, partly because our liverboard trip involved a shark feeding dive. So all dived down, took a sort of perch on a natural coral amphitheater, not coral, but a natural rock amphitheater under the water. And there was, planned shark feeding session. And this was something that the company that we decided to go with do once a fortnight. And to us felt quite lacking in authenticity, I suppose. If you're going out to feed the animals, that doesn't feel like a very genuine wildlife encounter. And generally speaking, you think that's going to affect the patterns and behavior of these animals. So we weren't too sure about it, to be honest. But the way it was sold to us, or I guess the way it was justified, was this was one way of making sharks more valuable alive than they were dead. So obviously, there is a global trade in shark hunting and using shark body parts for various purposes, legitimate or otherwise. And in order to kind of make them a more economically viable animal alive rather than dead, this was one way of doing it, increasing tourism to go and see them alive. And to do that, feeding them is the best way of attracting them to ensure that people can see them. And so we did do it. We sort of saw this feeding take place, but it did feel a bit like it was hard to justify that their behavior patterns were never going to change, because as soon as we were down in the water, they knew exactly what was happening. There were sharks circling everywhere, and presumably could already smell the tuna heads, leftover tuna heads that they were about to be fed. So yeah, it was an experience of two parts. It was incredible in one way, and it was fantastic to know that doing experiences like that could help sort of keep these sharks alive. But on the other hand, yeah, it definitely felt like it was going to be affecting their behavior patterns, and they knew exactly where to come and what was going to be on offer when they were there.
So after Australia, then across to New Zealand, did you have similar experiences there?
Yeah, I think New Zealand was fascinating for us, because I think it's probably, I would say it's the country Ellie and I were most excited to visit. I think that's fair to say. And it's somewhere we've talked about living in our future. And I'm not sure we've come away from it feeling that is likely, because actually there were so many really interesting challenges, probably more than I realised. You see the scenery and the beauty of New Zealand, and that all exists, but the political challenges were really interesting while we were there. And I think we were most surprised by the divide between the South and North Island. We went out, big fans of Jacinda Ardern, as lots of people are, and think she's absolutely amazing. And she walked past us in their Houses of Parliament, so we both had our fan moments.
While she was Prime Minister, I should say, it was quite a big deal. She was Prime Minister at the time.
It was massive. It was great. But for the first month, we didn't meet anyone on the South Island who was a fan of her. who even liked her, who liked her at all. You know, they really did not want her to be Prime Minister. It was just fascinating. At the time, she was trying to put through a big piece of legislation known as Three Waters, which I think has been repealed now. I don't think it lasted. It was a government reform to shift water responsibility basically from local councils to large publicly owned water entities. I think local farmers were getting annoyed at that perceived loss of control, that everything was getting centralised. And so because on the South Island, so many people are farmers and you know, value that local connection, particularly to their services, there was just so much anger going on, like real anger. And you were coming out of COVID, where the New Zealand government had been quite strong, I think it's fair to say, on their COVID rules. Having said all of that, we got to camper van around 2 incredible islands for 2 months. It was absolutely awesome. And we got to do these amazing hikes, amazing walks. We got to see some friends out there. I think, and it felt, I had a quick look at whether camper vanning is a sustainable way of travelling, and most people do feel it is environmentally good because you're reducing hotel stays. So if you're on holiday, particularly if you can get like a hybrid or an electric van. The trick for us was making sure that we used managed sites, because I think one of the issues New Zealand had is so much free camping created a lot of litter, created a lot of dump sites, particularly with toilet waste. So, you know, there were places for us to deal with our waste and water all over the island, which was really impressive. There were loads and loads of campsites for us to stay in. So it was a bit more expensive than I expected. It wasn't just, oh, we're rocking up to the side of the road and sleeping here tonight, because that didn't really exist as much as I think it used to in New Zealand. And it was much more sophisticated and well managed. But it was just such an incredible way to see the 2 islands for 2 months.
I think that gave us confidence as well. Like that in other countries, we maybe didn't really know where our waste was going, or if it was actually being, you know, recycled. You don't know if the infrastructure's there. This felt like we could be quite confident, actually, that if we were responsible for ensuring, you know, we kept hold of everything until we got to the campsite, we could be quite confident that that was being dealt with kind of in an appropriate way when we got there. So in terms of reducing our own impact while we travelled, I don't know about you, James, but I felt more confident knowing that we were sort of in control a little bit more than in other places that we've been.
And so your final stop on the trip is a continent that we've all met up together in. Very recently, the 3 of us were in Boston having a meal out together. So North America, I mean, did you feel similar in terms of appropriate waste management as how you were just mentioning about New Zealand? You know, waste is managed more formally than certainly other parts of the world.
I think so, yeah. We didn't spend very long there, so I'm actually racking my brains to think about whether it kind of had a huge impact on us. But I think probably just by virtue of being in a semi-familiar place, to the extent that it's Western and they speak English, I probably did have a bit more of that confidence there, that it was all being handled a bit better, particularly off the back of our trip to Boston. And this time we were on the West Coast, and we decided to finish our trip out in Disney, because we'd actually started our trip in Disney as well, Disneyland Paris, finished it in Disney in LA.
Yeah, and one of my favourite facts about Disney is that they created a colour called Go Away Green.
What?
You heard of this, Robbie? Yeah.
No.
So Disney have a special colour. It's actually a series of greens. And it's like military camouflage. And they use them to make objects blend into the background so you don't ruin the magic. And they do use it on their bins. So they paint their bins Go Away Green. So as you're walking around, you don't really notice the bins.
Well, the parks are still pristine, so it's not like they let any rubbish get scattered elsewhere, but I think they just don't want the bins to stand out, albeit it looks like they might have changed that a little bit, James, since we visited, because it looks like in some of the kingdoms and the worlds and stuff, they've incorporated the bins with a bit more design to be a feature, to be part of the world that they sit within. It was very clean, wasn't it?
Okay, so it's a whistle-stop tour of 7 continents, very impressive, but surely it's the travel and the carbon. It already through the discussion, I can see it weighs a bit heavy on you. So what was the carbon impact? Did you manage to work it out?
Of course. I spent the whole trip mapping out what we were using, and so I could carbon offset it, you know, and I think for us that was really important, because we were, and we've kind of alluded to, so frustrated at the quantity of flights, because we'd sort of mapped out this round the world trip and thought, hey, we could do this with like 5 flights. And then COVID hits, and every single country says, no, to get into our country, you have to fly in. We're not doing any buses. We're not doing any road travel. And our date was fixed. You know, the date had been fixed for a long time. We'd both put our careers on pause. We'd both said we've got to go October 2021. We had to go, and we had to work it out. And the only way I could justify it was then having an offset plan. So yeah, I calculated the travel carbon, so the flying and traveling around at 14.64 tons each. So 12 is about the average for a British person in a year. So we were a bit more than that, and that's just the travel. So on top of that, we will have had our food, hotels, just life in general. So when I came to do our carbon offsetting, what I did was I said, well, we've got roughly 15 tons each in the actual traveling round. And then I'm going to add on top of that 12 tons, which is like our normal life. I mean, typically that 12 tons for a Brit will include a holiday and, a few things that we just weren't doing. Travel, driving your car around. We just weren't doing any of that. So I basically thought, well, actually 27 tons is representative of how much we've spent over this trip each. So we then got to 54 tons as a total. And when I came to carbon offset that, I turned to ecology to fund a premium nature-based carbon avoidance initiative, which is from what I could see, deforestation prevention in Brazil, which felt right and looked like it was quite a good scheme. It was something like £16.50 a tonne. So across 54 tonnes, I think it was nearly £1,000 for us to offset the trip and hopefully give something back for all of the carbon that we'd used.
Yeah, it's obviously not cheap. We feel very privileged to be in a position to be able to even do that, because so many people who do go traveling will be doing it on a shoestring, or at least on a budget, to try and get as much out of it as they can. And so, we appreciate that not everyone would be in a position to do this. And we also appreciate having, you guys have covered it on the podcast before, carbon offsetting is not a perfect solution. It doesn't completely negate the impact of everything that we did while we were traveling, but we feel it's better than nothing in terms of trying to mitigate the carbon impact of this trip. We were really lucky to be able to do it, but we just want to do what we can to try and, offset it and kind of prevent a little bit of what we saw going on in terms of, we spoke earlier about the deforestation in the Amazon. So hopefully it's going some way to doing some good.
And I guess for us, it was part of the budget. We were like, if we're going to do this trip, here's the cost of the trip. And we're going to take the carbon footprint into account before we even go.
It was a prerequisite of the trip before we even knew how many flights we were going to need to take. As soon as those flights skyrocketed, pardon the pun, we knew it was going to be even more important. So it was going to be more expensive, but it was going to be even more important. So yeah, there was no way we were going to be able to do the trip without doing the carbon offsetting as well. So we just had to factor it in.
And Ellie, you are a guest on our podcast. This is an interview. You don't get away with it. So you get the 2 questions everyone gets. So we're going to offer a listener a gift. I was wondering if you had something in mind.
I did have something in mind. As we've mentioned, and as covered in our trip in Denmark, Lego is a big part of our lives and our house. James is a big fan of Lego, as you will have heard on recent episodes. I am a somewhat reluctant, I call myself a waffle, which is the wife of an adult fan of Lego. James is the apple. I'm a waffle. And every year on New Year's Day, Lego release new sets, and it used to be the case that we would make a trip and go and buy a new set for you. So
used to be the case. We're doing that today. We're out. As I'm listening to this,
oh yeah, you're not ordering it. We're actually, sorry. And so we'll be making our annual New Year's Day trip to Lego right. to get our hands on that. So it felt only right that the gift was Lego based for this, and thankfully, Lego have played right into our hands because they've released a recycling truck today. So that will be the gift for this episode. I will be in the store right now as this is going, picking up this Lego truck. Purchasing said Lego set, yeah. For somebody who's listening. So if you want the opportunity to win that, head on over to our Instagram, follow @RubbishPodcast, and like the episode picture which announces Ellie's episode, which I suspect, if I can organise that over Christmas, will be a picture of the 3 of us. Oh, yes. Robbie, you're going to come and we'll get a photo together? Yeah, that'd be great. And save it from just being my face on the grid. That would be good. I can see James breathing a sigh of relief that you're not re-gifting one of his own sets. Oh, I didn't even know that was an option. No, thank you, Robbie. No, it's not worth my marriage, Robbie. Moving swiftly on from that suggestion, if you had an environmental superpower, what would it be and how would you use it? Oh, this one's a little bit of a cop-out. Because I think it could probably be considered a generic superpower and not just a eco-friendly one. But based on everything that we've discussed, I think I'd have to opt for teleportation. Just being able to ping yourself to wherever you want to be and avoid all the carbon associated with travel, as is the case in our modern world. Before this trip, I was adamant that I didn't want to fly, or I wanted to reduce flights as much as possible. And we had the frustration, as we've already talked about, of ending up on planes far more regularly than we would have liked. And I got so frustrated, I found myself wishing for the ability to, apparate Harry Potter style to the next destination with all our luggage, not have to faff around, not have to worry about airports, not have to worry about any of that stuff. And how great a power that would be. And if everybody had that power, the impact it would have on our climate, and, not a single flight taken, all of the emissions associated with that would be just gone in an instant. So although it's not specifically an eco-friendly one, I do think the eco-friendly impact of that would be huge. So it's going to have to be, teleportation.
Wow. Carbon-free teleportation. Very good.
Ellie, thank you so much for coming on to Talking Rubbish. We are delighted to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
As always, thank you all for listening. Thank you for the reviews and engagement. We love getting the opportunity to do this podcast. Join our Discord, follow us on social media at Rubbish Podcast. You can email talkingrubbishpodcast@gmail.com, or you can WhatsApp us, and everything we've discussed today can be found on our link tree, and the details to all those things can be found in our show notes. There is nothing left for me to say other than see you next bin day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.